Welcome to episode 3 of Brews and Reviews. I'm Henry Ronan Daniel, and today we're going to be talking about WoodWWAD and Red Stripe. This isn't Twist Off, so just give me a second. You may notice that the Red Stripe beer is a little bit smaller than usual. This is 11.2 fluid ounces. I think a regular beer is 12. If you're one of those people out there who's trying to cut down, you can drink one of these and then say to yourself, well, that wasn't even really one. Not bad at all, it's a lager, but this is above Coors Light, Bud Light, Miller Light, something like that. A little more taste. Well, I'll give you my final review of the beer later. More importantly, let's talk about WoodWWAD. Now, if you've never seen WoodWWAD's videos, check out the links in the description box. I've got tons of them to all the best videos. Go have a field day. In brief, this gentleman, WoodWWAD, WoodWWAD as I sometimes call him. I know that's not how he wants it pronounced, but it's just force of habit. That's just the way it is sometimes. WoodWWAD makes videos about role-playing games. Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, and of course his own homebrew system within the Ring of Fire. Maybe you're saying to yourself, role-playing games, this sounds pretty nerdy. And you might be right. But I would like to tell you about my own personal history with Dungeons & Dragons. Starting out when I was just a little boy growing up out in the wilds of Alabama, and I had to befriend whatever other hillbillies were living in my community. We tried to play Dungeons & Dragons sometimes. There were other nerds, more or less, living in my little town in Alabama, but there were never quite enough people to get a game together. There was trouble always scraping enough books together, getting the money to buy the books, and you could never get the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master Guide together in the same room at the same time. That I remember being a big problem. Then, like a lot of people, I went to college, and I had a lot of variegated groups of friends in college. Most memorably, I had my Christian friends, my nerd friends, and my theater friends. Those were the main three groups, though there were others. If they could have all gotten together and done some sort of Christian nerd theater, I think that could have been interesting, and I obviously would have been into it. Perhaps a production of the play The Nerd by Larry Shue. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it's quite funny, so check that out on YouTube as well. Anyway, I was hanging out with my nerd friends in college. We were actually in a pretty good Vampire the Masquerade game that my buddy Kevin ran for a while. This was my first good experience with role-playing. This is when the first time I saw it done well. And this is the truth. Just like with anything, there's a big difference between good and bad. Good role-playing can be great fun. Bad role-playing can be very bad indeed. But anyway, then I left college. I left my nerd friends to their continued nerddom, wherever they're doing that. And I didn't really get a chance to play for a long time. Then, some years later, I was living in Carbondale. And a friend, I had moved to Carbondale so that my wife could finish her PhD. And one of her friends came to me and said, "Oh, my husband is looking for someone to play Dungeons & Dragons with. Do you think you'd want to play with him?" I, of course, jumped at the chance and said, "Yes, of course, that sounds great." Now, I don't know how cool I thought this guy was going to be, but when he showed up, he was one of those deep in the dungeon freak show nerds. To the point where I just couldn't communicate with him. It was that bad date feeling. Because you've got to stick it out for an hour. You can't look at your phone after 5 minutes and say, "Oh, I gotta go." You're in there for an hour, 60 minutes. There's no way around it. I remember at a certain point I said to him, "This has been fun. I think I'm probably going to need to go back to work now." I work from home. But he still didn't leave. Then, 10 or 15 minutes went by. I said for a second time, "Maybe you didn't hear what I said before, but I'm actually going to have to go back to work now. It's been fun meeting you." And he still didn't leave. And about another 15 minutes went by. At this point, I resorted to, "Do you need me to help carry things to your car?" At which point he did actually understand, and he left. Now, I didn't know what to do in this situation. So I went to my wife, and I said, this was my plan at least, I said, "You know what? I'm a grown man, and so is he. So I'm just going to send him an email and say, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want to do it anymore. And my wife said to me, if you do that, his wife will never come back to Sewing Circle. So don't say you don't want to do it, just say you don't have time. And of course my response to that was, but I do have time? It was my idea. I was the one who actually suggested it, so how could I not have time? In the end, anyway, I decided to lie, and I told him I didn't have time. So my Dungeons & Dragons goals and desires were thwarted for another period of years. Then finally, at long last, maybe 2 years ago, I got into a really, really good group of guys, and we've been playing monthly or so ever since. Mostly Dungeons & Dragons, a little bit of Call of Cthulhu. And it's been a blast. The point of all these stories is don't let other people dictate your life to you. Where are those other people going to be when you need them? When you need their help? They're not going to be there. You only live once. Live your own life. That's what Andrew Wood says. That's what I say. All right. I'm making my way through this red stripe in record time. Usually I don't quite finish during the course of the review, but today it looks like I'm going to. Certainly when you're considering YouTube, role-playing gamers can be broken down into 3 categories. First, you got your freak show nerds. That's, as I was describing before, nothing wrong with that. Those guys can be interesting in their own way, but in terms of like watching someone role play for hours and hours on end, most of their jokes are going to be not very funny, and you're going to get sick of it after a while. The second group of people is boring middle-class white people who are playing Dungeons & Dragons just like other people would play darts, basically. It's just something for them to do to kill some time. Then, third of all, you got your cool guys like Andrew, who actually know something about role-playing and are fun to watch. This guy's got so many good videos up. I'm going to go through my top 10, 10 to 1, of course, in ascending order of coolness and importance. Number 10, the WoodWWAD campaign. Episode 1 of the WoodWWAD campaign. These are all linked in the description box. This is my favorite Dungeons & Dragons campaign, the best Dungeons & Dragons campaign that is currently on YouTube. It's AD&D 2nd edition, Forgotten Realms. Andrew Wood plays Rivishur, who is an elf who's been raised by hobgoblins. And so he has adopted the mores of hobgoblin society. And what I love about my man Andrew is he gets over that hobgoblinness so completely that you absolutely believe, yes, this elf was raised by hobgoblins. And they have a different society and their own way of looking at the world. There's also Anorian, the satyr, who plays a major role in the campaign. And during the beginning of the campaign, there was Shivek, the human mystic. He bails after about 5 or 6 sessions and is replaced by a girl who is terrible. So that was kind of a bummer. But anyway, the beginning parts of the WoodWWAD campaign certainly are truly amazing. Great fun. You should watch them. Coming in at number 9, we've got gnomes. Always a bad idea in D&D. I am anti-gnome myself. Consider this gnome. This gnome is maybe 3.5 feet tall, if that, maybe 3 feet tall. How do you think the first orc is going to react to seeing this little gnome? Man, he's going to give him that stiff elbow. That gnome's not going to know what to do. Coming in at number 8, we've got 3d6 straight down the line. Now, if you don't know what a d6 is, this is a regular 6-sided dice that you would use to play like Monopoly or whatever normie games you're playing right now. You also use these regular dice in Dungeons & Dragons, and you roll 3 of them to determine your statistics. The best is 18, the worst is 3. Of course, what he gets into in this video is that you can roll up truly preposterous, mentally handicapped, physically handicapped characters that are impossible to play. Coming in at number 7, we've got Andrew Wood's thoughts on the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, this isn't even related to Dungeons & Dragons or role-playing gaming at all, but a point that he makes very often on his channel, and a very legitimate one, is that Dungeons & Dragons and pro wrestling are very, very similar in certain ways. They're both examples of fictionalized combat, in a way, and storytelling, and making it look like something is happening when nothing is really happening. and he talks about, you know, selling and getting over. That's the same thing you gotta do in pro wrestling or Dungeons & Dragons. You gotta sell, you gotta get over. Gotta get heat sometimes, gotta get good pops. Coming in at number 6, we've got Monster Ecology, number 1, Hobgoblins. I was just saying earlier that there's this great campaign, the WoodWWAD campaign, where Underwood plays an elf that was raised by hobgoblins. The most interesting thing about Dungeons & Dragons, to me, or one of the most interesting things, is getting to see the different societies, the different ways that societies can be structured, the different attitudes, the different moral values that different groups of people, or demi-humans, humanoids, goblinoids, whatever you want to call them, may have. Coming in at number 5, we've got Libris Mortis, the Book of the Undead review. I have actually read this book. It's great. What's important always in any kind of art that you want to make, including role-playing gaming, is the details. Reanimating that skeleton, resurrecting that zombie. How do you do that exactly? Do you arrange the bones in a certain way beforehand? What salves or tinctures must you apply to this corpse before you raise it back up to fight for you? These are the questions you need to ask yourself. Number 4 on the list is how to run Call of Cthulhu. Now, if you've never heard of Dungeons & Dragons, then you've definitely not heard of Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game. This is a superior role-playing game to Dungeons & Dragons. It's more rules light, it is more flexible, it's set in the real world. There are a lot more possibilities, there are a lot more different ways you can play the game. If you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, that ain't shit, as far as I'm concerned. You need to be playing Call of Cthulhu. Get that 7th edition rulebook. It's for sale now from Chaosium. Order today. Coming in at number 3, I'm going to pick the first episode of Within the Ring of Fire, Beneath the Surface. Now, this actually isn't on Anders' channel. This is on a different channel. The guy's name is Lou. I think just L-U-O is the channel name. But this is his homebrew system. This is Underwood's idea of the perfect role-playing game. Now, I haven't bought it myself yet, and I'm going to explain why I chose not to at the end of this review. But I will say that watching these guys play this game is really fun. It is a very different kind of role-playing experience. It's very heavy on the role-playing. There's very little combat, only a bit. But these guys are all great role players. Onion Kid plays an ogre. Wonderfully convincing performance as the ogre. I forget the ogre's name, but check that out. Number 3. So, you know, I was saying before about how these Red Stripe beers, like, it's not even a whole beer. So I haven't even really had one yet. So I should maybe have this second one, so then at least I'm having a full one. For the second video, I'm going to talk about one called Fire Still Burning. And I thought for a while that Andrew had taken this video down, but it's still up there. And it actually discusses his private life a bit, and since it's still up, I guess it's okay that I say this, a period of time he spent in jail. Which is a bit out of character for your typical Dungeons & Dragons player, I guess. That is part and parcel of why I enjoy Underwood's videos so much, is because he's not the typical Dungeons & Dragons player. He's a guy who seems to have lived a somewhat different life from the typical player, let's say. My favorite part of that video is he discusses a role-playing game that he invented while in jail and taught the other inmates how to play, called Salvation, Jailhouse Rules, if you understand. And that leads right up into my number 1 video by Underwood. This is the video that he posted after Dusty Rhodes died. Now again, this is a pro wrestling video. This is not a Dungeons & Dragons video. But if you don't know who Dusty Rhodes is, then he is the all-time greatest babyface in the history of pro wrestling, daddy. Anyway, I could go on with my Dusty Rhodes impression, but why? You get the gist. I love Dusty Rhodes, so does he. Check out that video. It's my number 1 from Underwood. It's time to get down to brass tacks here and pick out some numbers. pick out some numbers for Red Stripe beer and Underwood. Now, as far as Red Stripe goes, I gave Coors Light a 2. This is better than Coors Light. It's not hugely better, but it's better. I'm going to give this I was going to give it a 4. Is it worse than average? It's not. It's not worse than average. It's not worse than average. I'm going to give it a 5. I'm going to give Red Stripe a 5. Regarding Underwood, look, I've just spent 20 minutes jacking this guy off, saying how great I think his videos are. There are some complaints. I have 2 in the main. 1, he doesn't post videos anymore and seems unlikely to return anytime soon. I'm hoping we get some new Underwood content, but I'm not going to hold my breath. You know, sometimes life takes precedence. The other thing that I did want to criticize Ander for was, I think I mentioned before, that I had not actually purchased the Within the Ring of Fire books. The reason I did that is because I looked at some of the texts, and though the ideas were interesting, it needed a good proofreading. Just needed to make sure that all those sentences were really sentences. You could maybe hire somebody to do proofreading for you in the future. Maybe even me. I might even be able to give you a discounted rate for the second edition of Within the Ring of Fire. Maybe get in touch with me. But you know, despite these quibbles, Underwood is a great YouTuber. Was a great YouTuber, is a great YouTuber. I am going to give him an 8 out of 10.